booktube, and welcome to Tag Tuesday. This is the day when we do tags of all kinds on this little corner of booktube, and I'm going to do a tag triptych today. I'm going to do 3 tags in one day. I'm going to start out with the Interrail Eurorail tag Part 2 by Mark at Book Time with Elvis, whose Part 1 started us on a journey where each destination and each characteristic of traveling by rail in Europe generates some prompts. And it was, Part 1 was wonderful. I did it. I'll leave a link to my original video if I remember. I'll leave a link to both of Mark's videos because he's now done a Part 2. And I urge everybody to do this, even if you've never traveled. These are so much fun. So Part 2 starts off with, having had your fill of paella, you head off to Lisbon. It is a long route with stops and transfers along the way. Try doing it without doing it on the Eurorail. It's even longer. Have you read a book that felt like it wasn't ever going to end? I've read many, many books along these lines, but in this case, not so much a book as an author, Joseph Frank, who I think by any measure is the greatest biographer of Dostoevsky who's ever lived. He's written endlessly on Dostoevsky, including a multi-volume biography, and I read that multi-volume biography as the volumes were coming out, and in every single case, I thought, all right, this is definitive work. No one will ever be able to write a biography of Dostoevsky again without heavily leaning on these books, but they're endless deserts. And that's not Joseph Frank's fault. It's not Dostoevsky's fault either. It's God's fault. it's the fault of the nature of Dostoevsky's life, which is just unbelievably, almost unrelievedly bleak. So that it even when the books are 400 pages each, I think, but they feel so much longer than that. They just feel like they go on forever. And it's not ultimately all that interesting. I mean, it's just misery after misery. So I'm going to say those. They're in an odd position for me because if you were to email me and say, what is the best biography of Dostoevsky? I read his novels and I really love them. Okay, reading his novels and really loving them, I completely understand. But if you were to email me and ask me that question, I would have to say the best is Joseph Frank. But what an ordeal. so anyway, then finally, after much travel, you arrive in Lisbon, a beautiful city that had large parts of the city destroyed by the great earthquake of 1755. I want to stress here, in the context of this prompt, that I was not responsible, and I have an alibi that places me hundreds of miles away at the time. Okay? Have you ever experienced an earthquake, tornado, hurricane, or some such force of nature? I have indeed. All of the above. I've experienced earthquakes in a number of places, tornadoes all throughout the American Midwest, and hurricanes not only on land but at sea. And a bunch of other things too, including at one point in the Alps, a lightning strike, really nearby. I've experienced a lot of these things, and I've said before on this channel, I know that your mileage may vary, as the old phrase used to go. You may have different, especially if you've gone through them yourself, you may have different ideas. But for me, the most terrifying is a bad earthquake. Mark tells a story, and it's hilarious, but he tells a hilarious story about being so hungover from a night out drinking that he wasn't sure he was going through an earthquake. Or maybe it was just the earth spinning. But that would be a mild earthquake. I'm talking about a bad one. A bad earthquake, I think, is the most terrifying of all of these things. Lightning strikes, it's over before it begins. For a minute, the sun comes to Earth, or for a nanosecond, the sun comes to Earth. But you don't know it at the time. If you survive it, then you know it afterwards. I and all of my animals and my entire tent and everything in it were all thrown 30 feet, just as if somebody had picked the whole thing up and shaken the ground underneath it. But we didn't know what it was until it was over. So lightning strike, there's no element of terror. And with a hurricane and a tornado, at least hopefully, there's a great element of preparation. There's a great element of warning. With tornadoes, not always so, but you generally know if you're in the middle of tornado weather. Not the tornado season, but actual tornado weather, where the sky starts to look bruised. Really does. Starts to look like a deep green bruise on the skin. Where the wind starts to feel very strange, and where a lot of local animals can hear the shear of the wind from a county over. They can feel that drastic change is happening. With a tornado or a hurricane, you get some warning. So there's a little bit of mitigation there. I mean, sometimes the warning doesn't do any good. I have been through hurricanes and tornadoes where the warning didn't reach me, or where there wasn't enough warning, and I simply had to live through them. But with tornadoes and hurricanes, there is at least an element of warning. You can get to shelter, improvised in some way. And I've been through many, many tornadoes in that kind of improvised shelter, and even hurricanes. If you've been in a hurricane on the open ocean, any kind of hurricane on land is going to feel very, very mitigated. If it's on the open ocean, there's nothing at all. There's nothing, no chance of shelter at all, and no way to outrun it. Usually, there's no way to outrun unless you get, again, some advance warning. But with earthquakes, no, there isn't any warning. And when it's bad, when it goes on for 2 or 3 minutes, even a minute can feel like an eternity in a bad earthquake. And that, for me, that is always the natural disaster that makes you feel the most helpless. A lightning strike, you don't feel helpless because you don't know anything until it's over. And a hurricane and a tornado, you might feel helpless if you're in shelter and you're wondering, how bad is your library getting hit 2 floors up. But it's not quite the same as an earthquake where it's happening to you in the moment and you're as vulnerable as anybody else. There is no shelter. So I'm going to say I have been in all of these things and others, but I'm going to say the earthquake is the worst. The one natural disaster that I have never been part of is an asteroid strike. A big asteroid strike. I've watched film footage, dashboard footage of asteroid strikes, minor kinds, in, for instance, Russia or Eastern Europe, where a fairly small chunk will brighten up the sky, again, brighter than the sun, for a few seconds, and cause a concussive wave, cause all sorts of glass injuries and burns and whatnot. But I'm talking about a bigger asteroid. The Earth's solar system is absolutely full of bigger asteroids. And despite what astronomers often will sort of offhandedly say, big ones could come close to or within impact range of Earth without anyone knowing anything about it until a day out. There's no way for humans to deflect or mitigate a sizable asteroid strike, even if they knew it was coming 100 years away, much less a day away. But the thing is, a lot of these things would be approaching in the dark. There wouldn't be any way for light from the sun or reflected light anywhere to light them up, which means there's virtually no chance that humans would know they were coming. Not that it would do any good. It wouldn't do any good anyway. I've never been through something like that. And it is absolutely bound to happen. It's amazing that it hasn't happened in human history. Just amazing. That the biggest sizable asteroid strike in the history of human civilization happened in the middle of nowhere, up in the Siberian forest, flattened a whole forest. But that's not the same thing as if that same asteroid had struck Moscow. And that is bound to happen. That is absolutely statistically bound to happen. And imagine if it did. Imagine if an asteroid the size of Long Island, we're not talking the size of Texas, imagine if an asteroid the size of Long Island struck Long Island. Just try to imagine that. It's almost inconceivable. 15 million people would die. And the solar system, you might think, it's the sun, and then it's these discrete planets, and then in between Mars and Jupiter there's an asteroid belt, and then out further there's a Kuiper belt. And so we know what we have to worry about. No. There are objects, tiny, relatively tiny objects, bus-sized, building-sized, city-sized objects, whirring around the sun everywhere, inside of every orbit. And astronomers, A, can't keep track of where they all are, don't know where they all are, and B, wouldn't matter if we knew anyway. So I have never experienced that. And that could happen. Human society would probably go on. But oh my, that's never happened. So that's a natural disaster. I'm not saying I'm looking forward to it, but that has never happened. Also, there are unnatural disasters, right, which we are all going to face. If you are under the age of 20 and you're watching this video, you're going to live in an unnatural disaster world that is developing now in front of our eyes every day. You're going to live in a world that doesn't have 4 seasons anymore, because winter is gone, autumn is gone, and there's a summer season, yes, but there's also a fire season and a storm season. And the calendar is going to start to look that way. It's not going to be the peaceful snows of winter, the gentle amber hues of autumn. It's going to be catastrophe to catastrophe as the climate radically changes, as Florida disappears. Although, speaking as a lifelong viewer of Florida Man in American news, I'm not saying that I'm sad about that. The only way to fix what Florida is to the United States society is for it to sink beneath the waves. But one way or another, let's move on. God, I don't remember where we were. Lisbon was the hometown of Fernando Pessoa. Have you ever read anything by him? I have read everything by him. It's not all that long a list. I have never found him to be the compelling genius that so many people do. He's not one of these people where I say, I haven't found him to be a genius because he's a fraud. I don't doubt that he is a genius, but he is on a different wavelength than me. I just never understood that wavelength. But I wanted to, I've read his works, and I wanted also to recommend here, Richard Zenith wrote a gigantic 1,000-page biography of Pessoa that was just released by, I think, W.W. Norton in the United States just a little while ago. It is terrific, a fantastic biography, and exhaustive. And Pessoa led a very depressing, talk about Dostoevsky, he led a very depressing life, but a very interesting one. So the Zenith biography of him, I cannot recommend strongly enough. It'll cost you a pretty penny, but it's worth it if you like this author. Let's see here. Interestingly, Pessoa published just 4 books in his lifetime, and 3 of them were in English. He also translated books like The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne or poems by Edgar Allan Poe into Portuguese. Do you read many translated works, and what are some of your favorites? And I've mentioned translated works many, many times on this channel. I could mention John Dryden, the John Dryden translation of Plutarch that is commonly so called, even though Dryden wrote some of the translations in that huge book, and a lot of other very talented people wrote a lot of others. Dryden put his name on it because he was the driving, his publishers considered that he was going to be the driving commercial factor in whether or not it sold. It was no small undertaking to buy. But so we call it the Dryden translation. Either way, I love it. I love it even for the polyphony of voices. Or also Aubrey Selincourt's translation of the Histories of Herodotus. How could I not mention that when talking about translation? But I think one of the most remarkable translation efforts that I have ever seen was by Barbara Reynolds, who translated Orlando Furioso by Ariosto, which is a very long Renaissance poem, an epic sort of quasi-chivalric poem, but it is so good. It is so amazing, and it's so complex to translate. I'm not talking Ariosto was not, a Virgil-esque, a Dante-esque wordsmith. It's the complexity of the narrative. He builds and imbricates his narrative over and over again, folds it back and forth on itself a million times. There are some scenes that extend over many cantos in Orlando Furioso that are mind-boggling to read, much less to translate, and Barbara Reynolds does a fantastic job. It's in 2 fat volumes for Penguin Classics. I don't think they print them anymore, and why would they, really? I mean, who is the readership for a 2-volume English language translation of Orlando Furioso? There isn't one. But I recommended it before on this channel. I recommend it again. It is a stupendous feat of translation into English. Let's see here. Pessoa was fond of the odd drink or 10. You head up to the city of Porto, famous for, among other things, port, a drink of fortified wine. Do you have a favorite tipple now and again? If you do not drink alcohol, then what is your favorite thirst-quenching beverage? Here I want to stress what your nagging, life coach has already stressed. Alcohol doesn't quench the thirst. It might feel like it's doing that in the moment, but it doesn't. It led to many and many a disastrous hangover that people think, I'm thirsty, so I'll drink alcohol. It's not what you want to drink if you want to quench your thirst. But in answer to the question, yes, I like cheap red wine. Not expensive, not snooty stuff, not anything like that. I always think about the line from CJ on The West Wing when she's being confronted with all sorts of wine snobbery, and she says, "It's wine, you drink it." That I agree with completely. So I don't care if it's box wine for $3 or a gigantic jug that we will decant into glasses over the course of a whole wondrous evening, because I only tipple in company with friends, and I love doing that. Absolutely love it. When I'm doing that, sky's the limit. I'll have as much wine as there is to have, but I don't do it on my own. And when I do, white wine, no, I'd rather not. Hard drinks, hard liquor, no, I'd rather not. And the reason, I think, is obvious. Fans of hard drinks will say otherwise. The harder the drink, the more fortified the alcohol, the faster you are going to drift away from the conviviality of a group conversation with friends. Wine facilitates that. It's only 10%, 11% alcohol, so it facilitates that. It really does ease an evening. It feels wonderful. Whereas if everybody was passing around whiskey, what would that gathering be like in 2 hours? I've seen those kinds of gatherings, and they end up with rankers. Every person is a ranker's island unto themselves, and there's no more conviviality. So it's wine. It's red wine, and that is my favorite. I only drink 3 things. I have no idea what that beeping is behind me. I'm just going to ignore it. Maybe it's Pessoa. I drink 3 things. I drink orange juice, no pulp, water, and cheap red wine. And once upon a time in my life, my standard joke was I drink only those 3 things, and I drink all 3 of those things in enormous quantities. But now, thanks to the pandemic, I don't have guests over here every week anymore. I used to look forward to that. Somehow or other, I would have a guest over on a Friday or a Saturday when they didn't have to work the next day. Get in a bunch of wine, order horrible fried food from next door, and have just a wonderful evening. I'm hoping that we go back to that. That would be nice. But anyway, let's see here. Porto is home to the Livraria Lelo, a beautiful bookshop that, unfortunately, due to a tenuous link to the Harry Potter films, has now become a bit of a tourist attraction. What are you doing, baby? What are you doing? You're just undergoing a full-body manicure while I'm on camera. Let's see here. Have you got a favorite bookshop or library? Well, yes. And if you've made 4,000 videos, you're not going to have many secrets along these lines. I do have a favorite. Let's start with the library. My favorite library is the Boston Public Library. The old building. The McKim Mead and White building. The Boston Public Library has 2 buildings. They aren't really connected to each other except by a walkway in the middle. It's sort of like a Siamese twins, one of whom is born deformed and dying, and the other one is beautiful. Something like that. A binary star where one is a beautiful type G star and the other is a little brown dwarf or something like that that's giving off deadly radiation. The new version of the Boston Public Library is ugly. It's hideous. Just underwent a massive renovation about 5 years ago, and the renovation did about as much as you can do with a building that was built like a police precinct. It did about as much as you could do to humanize that space. But the old library, oh my, the old library right next to it is beautiful. So that's my favorite library. It's Boston Public Library. Once upon a time, many, many times in my life, in fact, when the dogs that I had were old, very old, but not yet sick, not yet dying, not yet querulous or nervous in any way, older dogs who are, 8, 9, 10 years old, will sleep all day long. Deeply sleep all day long. Peacefully sleep all day long. They aren't doing that out of boredom. They're doing it because they want to. Their metabolism is slowing down. And it's not going to matter whether you're there or not. And that was true for me for many, many periods in my life. Probably it will end up being true for Frida. It will end up being true with her. Can't imagine it now, but it could happen. And during those years, from age 7 to age 10, something like that, age 11 or 12 if you're lucky, I knew perfectly well that there were huge chunks of every day where I was not going to be missed. I wasn't going to be needed, and I wasn't going to be missed. So I would just I'd make sure my dog was nice and comfortable, had everything they needed, and then I'd pack a bag and go to the Boston Public Library, go to Bates Hall, one of the most beautiful spaces that I know of, even in its previous incarnations when it had no air conditioning and bad shutters on the windows, and just soak up the atmosphere and work there for a long time. And maybe I will do that again. But I have severed relationships with the Boston Public Library completely during the course of the pandemic. So I'll have to see what that's like, see if I can revive that. But my favorite bookshop is the Brattle Bookstore here in Boston, an old bookstore in downtown Boston that I dearly, dearly love. So I don't think it's any surprise to any of you. Let's see here. The Douro River runs through Porto, and the old town is a UNESCO World Heritage Site with its 6 bridges across the river. Have you visited any UNESCO sites? If so, tell us about some of them. I'm pretty sure that I've visited a huge number of UNESCO sites, yes. Lots and lots and lots of them. I won't say more than anybody on BookTube, but it could very well be more than anybody on BookTube. Certainly I would think that I've visited more national parks here in America than anyone on BookTube. But one way or another, yes, I have visited a huge number of UNESCO sites. I jotted down one of them here, just one, as a little goad to Mark, because it's Agrigento, the ancient Greek and other ruins at Agrigento on the southern coast of Sicily. And the reason why I mention Agrigento is because that might be the next stop if these round the world tags of Mark's continue. Right? When, as you're going to see, when this tag ends, we have arrived in Italy. Well, once we tour all of Italy, which would be the next tag, after that, Mark has a choice. He can either take us to Central Europe, his own neck of the woods, or he can take us to Sicily and on to the coast of Africa. I don't know which he's going to do, but one way or another, I wanted this as a subtle nudge that I definitely want to see that, regardless of which direction he takes us in. I lived just outside of Taormina on Sicily for a long time, and I've been over every inch of the island, every inch of it, and it's quite nice. It's not lush, it's not lovely, but large parts of it aren't lush or lovely, but oh my, I have some very, very nice memories. Let's see here. We go on. This is much like Mark himself, a long-winded and chatty tag. So just have to make your peace with that. Finding yourself in a particularly devout mood and with a lot of time on your hands, you decide to walk the Portuguese Camino de Santiago, all the way to Santiago de Compostela, which will take you between 10 and 12 days. If you're not up to it, you can grab a bus there in 3.5 hours. I have done both. I have walked, and I have also taken the bus. Could not walk it, considering the historical significance. If you can, you should walk it. Do you enjoy walking / hiking? What is the longest walk you have ever done? I do enjoy walking. I don't so much enjoy hiking, because a lot of times, the times when I have gone hiking with people, the hiking element of it begins quickly to conspire against the conviviality of it. And as you might be guessing, that is kind of central to me. If you're hiking a little too much, then you're not going to be really talking with your friends. You're instead of be concentrating on not dying. I spent a lot of time covering a lot of ground on foot. Most of my travel has been on foot. That hasn't been on the water. And a lot of that time, I'd say probably 80% of that time, I was by myself with dogs on foot. But in those cases, I much preferred what could be closer to called walking to hiking. And as far as the longest walk that I've ever done, I'm not sure that it is the longest walk in terms of distance, but it certainly felt it. And that is the Great Namib Desert in Namibia, which is 1,000 miles. That's 1,000 miles of mostly hell on earth. And I did that mostly on foot. I'd say probably 99% of the walk that I'm thinking of was done on foot a long, long time ago with an old friend of mine and a couple of friends of hers that just seemed to go on forever and ever and ever. It had its own kind of very, very forbidding beauty, but it still seemed to go on forever and ever. So it was the first thing that came to mind for a long walk. For all I know, I've done a lot of walks that were longer. The Appalachian Trail I did on foot. I didn't do it all in one stretch. And also, you know, for all I know, in fact, almost certainly I've done more walking cumulatively in the city of Boston or around the edges of Martha's Vineyard or Nantucket than if you were to lay that out in a line. That line is probably longer than the Namib Desert. After a bit of R&R and some intense foot bathing in Santiago de Compostela, you embark by train to Bilbo Baggins, the de facto capital of the Basque country. The Basque country was the home of Juan Sebastián Elcano, a man who took over Magellan's circumnavigation of the world after his death. I think you can see from this prompt and from a lot of the others why I love these tags. You don't know what direction Mark's mind is going to take you in. Have you read much nonfiction on discovery and exploration? Are there any interesting books you would recommend to us? And of course, when you think of discovery and exploration, one of the first names that comes to mind is Captain Cook. And when Captain Cook's name comes to mind, I want to recommend it's a bit of a stretch as a recommend. J.C. Beaglehole wrote a 1,200-page biography of Captain Cook. It's not available in print anymore, but you can occasionally find a used copy. I found one. I found one from Mark Richardson, so it can be done. And it's terrific. It's an amazingly good biography. It's very, very long, but Cook lived a very full life. But in addition to that, I want to recommend The Penguin Book of Outer Space Exploration, edited by John Logson, which is a Penguin classic. That is, it's not long at all. It's nowhere near as long as the Beaglehole Cook biography. And it's about exploration. It's the primary documents of mankind's first tentative steps towards exploring the very near solar system, the inner orbit of Earth, the outer orbit of Earth, the moon, and maybe a little bit outwards from that. And when you realize that that's what you're looking at, that you're looking at essentially the Federalist Papers of Star Trek, you're looking at the original documents of a species, the only species so far that we know of that ever had this capability, reaching outside of its own homeworld to explore. I think I'm a fan anyway of space exploration. I think it's one of my favorite subjects, one of my favorite things that humanity has done, and that Penguin book is amazingly good. So I wanted to recommend it. Let's see here. Not far from Bilbo Baggins lies the town of Guernica, made famous by the atrocities committed there during the Spanish Civil War by the Luftwaffe in support of General Franco's fascists. These atrocities are commemorated in Pablo Picasso's painting Guernica. Picasso is known for being an influential figure in both the Cubist and Surrealist movements. Are you a fan? Have you got any favorite art schools or movements? I'm not a fan of Picasso. No, I don't like any of the stages of his art. I don't think any of it is any good. I am, however, as long as we're talking about books and big biographies, I am a fan of an ongoing biography of Picasso, a multi-volume biography of Picasso by a writer named Richardson, which is tremendous. It's an amazing thing in biography. I mentioned the multi-volume biography of Dostoevsky and how dreary it was. The multi-volume biography of Picasso is the opposite of that. Every volume is fascinating in its own right. It makes me, anyway, completely forgiving of how long it's taken Richardson to write this whole thing. And that whole series is coming to an end in 2021. The autumn season is giving us the final volume in that series, where finally, at some point in that volume, Pablo Picasso will die. so I wanted to recommend that series while I'm talking about it. But I do have a favorite kind of painting, but it's not a school. It's not a movement. It's Victorian and Edwardian painting. Artistic snobs, and really is there any other kind, would probably call it genre painting, because a lot of times the artist took historical or biblical or literary subjects and painted them. But I'm thinking of them as beautiful and moving, directly emotionally moving. They don't require that you look at the world through unfocused astigmatism, like Impressionism. They don't require that you look at a botched canvas and simply force yourself to see art, like the modern art movement, where if it weren't for the experts, you wouldn't even know that you were looking at anything, at a so-called piece of art. If the experts weren't telling you that if you don't see a masterpiece there, you must be some sort of country bumpkin, you would never see it. It would never strike you as a work of art. It would never strike you, in other words, not great, but as anything that anybody did. It would strike you as something that just happened, an accident. Oh my, you had a blank canvas in a storage room downstairs, and something, maybe a tool fell off a shelf and ripped it diagonally down the front of the canvas. Oh, that's a shame. Well, I'm sorry about that. But there's a painting like that that's framed at the MoMA. A ripped blank canvas. And if you wanted to buy it, if the MoMA was willing to sell it to you, you'd have to pay $8 or $9 million. That is solely the product of art anxiety. That is solely the product of non-specialist people being told by alleged specialists that they had better like this, or it shows their ignorance. And none of that is true in the Victorian, Edwardian, even the pre-Raphaelite movement. None of that is true in their paintings. You can look at the painting and see not only that it's a work of art, but that you couldn't do it yourself. That it takes a lot of practice and art and skill. Those are my favorite paintings. Those are. They don't really have an umbrella term. But a painting done during the Victorian or Edwardian era, I am almost certainly going to like. I'm certainly going to know that it's a painting. I'm going to know that it's a work of art. And then I'll want to know who the artist is. I won't look at a stretched canvas in a frame at MoMA that has random splotches of paint, or or not even that, nothing at all, just a blank canvas, I won't look at it and think, why am I supposed to like this? If it's no good, I don't like it. I don't care what you think I should like. But anyway, we don't want an art lecture from me, do we? Let's just move on, shall we? Let's see here. From Bilbo Baggins, you travel to Barcelona. In Barcelona, you visit the Camp Nou, home to the Barcelona football team, to many the national team of Catalonia. Are you a football, that is soccer, fan? That's to differentiate it from the utterly barbaric American sport called football. Soccer, you have lithe young men running up and down a pitch, trying to score. As far as I know, in the entire history of the sport known as soccer, no one has ever scored a goal on either side. It's mostly just men running. In the American version of football, it's 9-foot-tall black men who are more steroid than flesh, bashing against each other, with the occasional white savior figure, like Joe Namath or Tom Brady, coming in to dance all around on their way to Super Bowl. It's a weird sport, totally corrupt, totally strange. Can be mesmerizing to watch on a crisp fall afternoon in Iowa, but nevertheless, they aren't anything alike. The two footballs aren't anything alike. If not, what sport do you like? Do you ever go to matches, meets, events? I'm not a fan of any team sport. No. I don't follow the players. I don't know all the minutiae. The closest that I come is a certain era of Red Sox history, but the Boston Red Sox are an American baseball team. That's a long time ago. I'm not a fan. I consider it a little bit on the tedious side, but I have been to games. I've been to soccer meets when I was traveling in Europe, and also in the East, where it's huge, which is a huge phenomenon, same as it is in Europe. And I've been to sporting events in America as well. I've been to, for instance, the sports franchises in New England are incredibly popular. Boston is, by any definition, a sports town for the 4 reigning sports. There's the New England Patriots, which is the American football team, but that's mainly at Boston. There's the Boston Bruins, which is a hockey team, and going to a Bruins game is a once-in-a-lifetime experience. There's the Boston Red Sox, steeped in a huge amount of history. And there's the Boston Celtics, the basketball team. And I've been to games, to matches, to meets, to whatever of all of those. And I've also been to, if Boston is a sports town, then putting it lightly, so is Iowa City, Iowa, a sports town. Iowa is just football crazy anyway. And I have been to Iowa Hawkeyes football games many, many times. And also Iowa Hawkeyes basketball games, which can get mighty raucous. And friends would take me there, and they knew. I would sort of embarrassedly ask them, can I bring a book? One time I went to an Iowa Hawkeyes basketball game and brought not only a book, but a clipboard to do some writing. I had deadline writing to do, and the looks I got from the people around us in the stands. My friends eventually told me, please put the clipboard away. You can keep the book, but please stop writing during this game. And the same thing was true largely with books. It was accepted but frowned upon. So I generally stopped doing that, and sometimes the games were so enjoyable that I didn't mind, that I didn't miss it, but usually not. I've also been to many, many Iowa Hawkeye wrestling matches under the leadership of the legendary Dan Gable. And they, believe it or not, despite the fact that we're talking about tightly clad, muscular young teenagers grappling with each other in openly erotic poses, a lot of those matches held my interest. I wasn't tempted to read at all during a lot of those Hawkeye foot wrestling matches. But the main sports-related thing that I've been to many times and really, really liked, to the point where I would sometimes go for this and then sort of skip out on the subsequent game itself, is something called a tailgate party. Tailgating in the parking lot of Hampshire Stadium in Iowa City on a crisp, cool fall day means you show up early, you flatten down the bed of your truck, you bring your cooking gear, your grill and whatnot, and Iowans make a mountain of food in the tailgater before the game. Now, there's also a river of alcohol, but if you're not interested in staggering home and throwing up for 3 days, there's a mountain of food. And you might think it's just a cookout. So what? it is a cookout. There's a lot of conviviality. There is no one friendlier than a crowd of Iowans dressed in black and gold on a game day at a tailgater. You'll never find a friendlier crowd at all. But also, it's just a cookout, yes. But most parts of the country, most parts of America, speaking of America here for the minute, most parts of America, when they think beef that was grown in Iowa and then put on trains and shipped to the West Coast or the East Coast or up by the border of Canada. Most of the time, that's what they're thinking about, even though they don't know it. I know this is barbaric if you're talking about eating meat, but nevertheless, eating barbecue, eating tailgate food in Iowa when it's Iowa beef, when it hasn't been on a train for 3 weeks. Iowa tailgaters, I would go to one today if I could. If I could snap my fingers and go to one today. I might skip the ensuing game, but I would go to the tailgaters, absolutely. And I did go to plenty of them and eat the weight of an entire classroom of children. Just in one sitting. So anyway, let's see here. We're almost done. You decide not to stay too long in Barcelona. I think Mark Richardson is going to have a problem with that part of this tag if he ever does it. And instead move on back to France and up the Mediterranean coast to the nice town of Nice. Passing through the town of Cannes on the way. Cannes, of course, is well known for the film industry and has one of the industry's most glamorous film festivals. What are a few of your favorite films? What are the ones that were most disappointing films that you've ever seen? I am very familiar with Cannes, and I've been there a number of times. And I'm also familiar with, for more personal, later reasons, I will never be back to the French Riviera. I will never be back to Cannes. I will never see those places again, anything like it. That's kind of sobering to think about. It's interesting. It's always extra interesting for me to know people who will go there or spend time there. But when it comes to movies, least favorite movies, that's a long list. There are an infinite number of movies that I hate for an infinite number of reasons. Whether they're turgid and artistic, like a lot of the auteur directors that Jason at Old Blues Chapter and Verse loves so much, where the goal appears to be to put the viewer through an ordeal, and certainly not to entertain them. I don't want to have to get a movie. I don't want to have to sit there thinking, do I get it? Am I smart enough? Am I cultured enough? I don't want to have to do that at all. From those all the way to modern franchise movies that don't respect the franchise, that just destroy it for the fun of it because they think all white men are racist, or that all men are sexist, or something like that. Where there's a franchise that's destroyed for openly political reasons. The list of movies that I hate is very long and gets a little tedious. So I thought I would just list movies that I like. And it looks like from the little list that I dashed off here, half of them are from stage plays. Half of them are movies that were made of stage plays, and the other half are not. So I listed here Beckett, starring Richard Burton and Peter O'Toole. Terrific historical drama. Broadcast News. William Hurt, Holly Hunter, terrific supporting cast, including one of the only examples of Jack Nicholson comedy that I actually think works. And we could go on and on about why it works. Jack Nicholson is often trying to be funny. It's usually very painful to watch. In Broadcast News, it's a comedy turn. And the only reason I think it works is because the character is largely Jack Nicholson, a jerk. Which moviegoers just don't want to know because they're immediately going to give me that one line from Chinatown. One way or another, Broadcast News, definitely. I don't know how much currency it has now, but I absolutely love it. Also, the movie Dave, about the exact double of a corrupt and horrible, brutal, inhuman a-hole of a U.S. president, who is called in to be that president when a stroke incapacitates that president. And then that president eventually dies. And our character, Dave, is stuck in the Oval Office. And talk about a supporting cast. That has Frank Langella, steals the show, as a totally evil chief of staff. And also Sigourney Weaver, in a just terrific role as the First Lady, who hates her husband, but falls in love with Dave. I think, again, cinematisse, people who think of cinema as a sort of journey to Golgotha that you have to go through on the journey to Compostela on bended knee, leaving bloody knee prints behind, are going to hate a movie like Dave. They're going to say, oh, that's the kind of thing you like. Yeah, I do. Yes, I do. That's the kind of thing I like. Dave, Field of Dreams, nothing wrong with loving these kinds of movies. They're fantastic. And if you think you can do better, well, anyway, speaking of popcorn movie like this that I really love, also Jaws 2. I know that Jaws, the original movie, Spielberg movie, is loved by Cinematisse for a lot of its stuff, and a lot of its stuff is very good. It is a very effective movie. If I had been Spielberg, I would have left out even a quick clip of genuine footage of an actual shark, because it just sets off like a neon light that you're not showing an actual shark in the rest of the movie. I would have left that out. But Jaws 2, as a sequel, I just love. I think it's fantastic. And not anything less. Yes, it's a sequel. Yes, it has a number in the title. But Roy Scheider does better acting in Jaws 2 than he does in the original Jaws. You don't have Robert Shaw chewing up the scenery. But you also don't have anybody else phoning things in and not knowing what kind of a movie they're in. I think Roy Scheider has one of the best dramatic scenes in Jaws 2 of his entire career. It's a wonderful, wonderful moment where his character has been fired. And as he says in this scene, he's never been fired before. A very simple, relatable thing. It has nothing to do with a killer shark. Well, the killer shark is great in Jaws 2, don't get me wrong. But also, Long Day's Journey into Night, the movie, starring Sir Ralph Richardson and Katharine Hepburn. And the two of them are so great that you almost forget, Jason Robards, or you almost forget that anybody else is in it. It's a 4-part show. It's only 4 people. And you've got Ralph Richardson and Katharine Hepburn just hammering away at each other for the whole of 3 hours, and at the peak of their form. It's the same thing as, for instance, my favorite movie, The Lion in Winter, which is Katharine Hepburn banging away for 2.5 hours against Peter O'Toole. These are some of the greatest actors in the history of the profession. And in Long Day's Journey into Night, you just get that. You get that for the whole course of the movie. Also, I mentioned 12 Angry Men. The original 12 Angry Men is great. The movie version of 12 Angry Men is fantastic, with Henry Fonda and a fantastic supporting cast. And oddly enough, 12 Angry Men is also remade decades later. A lot of the dialogue's updated. A lot of the the scenes are subtly changed. And again, it's an incredible cast, just amazing. The Henry Fonda role is played by Jack Lemmon, and I believe in the movie version that I'm talking about, Lemmon is just a little too old. He's just a little too old for the role that he's doing, and so is George C. Scott as the Ed Begley figure, the blustery, bigoted holdout on the jury. They're both just a little too old for the roles. They do a really good job. There are a couple of fantastic moments, but oh my God, the supporting cast in that second 12 Angry Men is amazing. There's not a dud in the bunch. Even what's his name? Tony Danza. Resolutely E-list Hollywood celebrity who has Hollywood money because he had a successful sitcom. He's terrific in that movie, in the role that Jack Klugman plays in the original of a street kid. I'm from those projects. Maybe you can still smell it on me. It's a great show, no matter what. The remake proves that the original show's bones are absolutely bulletproof. This is an example where, if that's what you're going to get with an update, if the goal of 12 Angry Men, of an adaptation of 12 Angry Men, is to put the 12 best actors that you can find in the same scene for 2 hours, then if that is your goal, if that's the ethos that you're going to stick to, then I say, no matter how much it's going to anger the neck-bearded alt-right YouTubers, bring on 12 Angry Women. Bring on 12 Angry Women. Give me that. Give me 12 Angry Men, the exact same script, only with the 12 greatest actresses in the world. Can you imagine the Henry Fonda role in 12 Angry Men, played by Stockard Channing? Can you imagine how great that would be? Bring it on, I say. One way or another. We'll leave off. I'll also mention The Lion in Winter, since I brought it up already. It is my favorite movie, my single favorite movie. I love it, absolutely love it. And it is another perfect example of what I was talking about. 2 of the greatest actors in the history of the profession hammering away at each other for 2 solid hours. To the point where, in Long Day's Journey into Night, Jason Robards is a terrific actor, whether he's drunk or sober. He's a terrific actor. And you literally forget he's there because he is so outclassed by these 2 titans sharing the scenes with him. Same thing's true in The Lion in Winter. Anthony Hopkins is in the movie, and he's blown out of the water by these 2 forces of nature. So those are some favorite movies. Okay, I want to hear yours, though. I want everybody to do this tag. And I want you all to put subtle or maybe not so subtle pressure. Feel free to mail them a box of scorpions. I want you to put pressure on Mark to continue taking us around the world. He has lived in lots of places. He's a well-traveled booktuber. Let's get him to continue taking us around the world. We're in Italy now, so if he's going to continue this, the next world-traveling tag will be Italy. He will go up and down the peninsula, maybe inside just a bit, and then he will have a choice. Once he's done, I'm assuming that he will start in Venice and work his way south and then work his way back north again. Once he's done with that, is he then going to take a ferry to Sicily? Is he going to include Sicily with Italy, or is he going to take a ferry to Sicily and then hop over to Africa? Or, when he's up there at the top of the boot, is he going to cross over into his own stomping ground, Central Europe, and go from there all the way into Eastern Europe, Russia, all the way to Kamchatka, and then across to China? It's his decision what he wants to do, but it shouldn't be his decision whether or not to continue these series of international continental op tags. He should be drafted into doing this. I was going to say he should be drafted into doing this, otherwise he'll be a social outcast. But if he's on BookTube, he's already a social outcast. We can't threaten him with it. Let's just wrap this up. Last prompt here. Heading further up the Mediterranean coast, we arrive in a new country, Italy, and the city of Genoa, where we will pause for our journey for now, and if interest remains in this little tag, we will pick up our trip in the former home of Christopher Columbus. Until then, grazie mille, arrivederci. And the prompt reminds people that Christopher Columbus, despite that name, was Cristoforo Colon. He was Genoese. He was part of one of the greatest navigation cities of the early Renaissance. And as long as we're on the subject, I know it's not part of the prompt, I thought I would recommend, in the 21st century, you can't recommend biographies of Christopher Columbus anymore. You can't recommend Columbus at all. You're supposed to pretend he didn't exist. But nevertheless, Samuel Eliot Morison, a great Boston historian, wrote a terrific biography of Christopher Columbus. And unlike a lot of people who have written biographies of Columbus, Morison was a terrific navigator. He was a terrific blue water and green water navigator. He knew a lot of the stuff that Columbus knew almost to a supernatural degree. And it shows in the work. It really does. It shows in the work. So if you want to read a biography of Columbus, especially one from the freer era when we weren't expected to hate him in lockstep, I would strongly recommend Admiral of the Ocean Sea by Samuel Eliot Morison. And there we go. There you go. We are at the end of the Interrail Eurorail tag, part 2. Only part 2. Part 3, I don't care how many times I have to shirtless Skype with Mark in order to get him to make a part 3, but I want there to be one. A part 3 in which he takes us through Italy, which would be enormous fun for me because I lived in Venice, and I have been over every inch of the Italian peninsula in endless amounts of time. I lived in Venice for a long time, and every trip was every single inch of the hill country, everywhere along the coast, especially Rome. Endless amounts of time in Florence and everywhere else. Naturally, I will look forward to that tag, which I'm expecting will happen. And then, after the Italy tag, it'll be up to him where he wants to go. Does he want to go south to Africa? Or does he want to go east? I'm okay with either one, provided if he goes east, he circumnavigates and gets us back to Africa. Because the goal, if this is an enormous string of travel-related tags, as long as the prompts are these good, I don't care. You notice that the prompts don't rely on you having been to any of these places. They ask you if you have, but they don't rely on it. That's what makes this so inviting, for Mark to take us all around the world. And you know what the end point is. The end point is to arrive bedraggled and exhausted back in London. But anyway, for now, I'm going to wrap this up, but I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.